The Indianapolis Colts settle for mediocrity by keeping Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard for yet another season. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd over at horseshoehuddle.com, and my partner, Jake Arthur, is our snow boots on the ground out there in Indy.
My God.
Everyone is snow boots on the ground across the country right now. Hope you guys are staying safe with all this snow. Even me out here in Virginia, we got, a good 6, 7, 8 inches of snow here. So I hope you guys are all staying safe with that weather there and all cozied up listening to your favorite Locked On podcast. We have a very fun episode for you guys because the Colts made some major announcements last night before Black Monday, which is today, that Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen will be back for another season. So we'll get our reactions on that. We're going to talk about some of the players that Jake Arthur talked to today. Talked to DeForest Buckner, talked to Julian Blackmon, Alec Pierce, some really good stuff from the players out there. And then we're going to talk about some big changes coming to the Colts this offseason. Do we think they're going to make any big changes? And I'll probably, pour some water on anything optimistic that Jake wants to say in this episode, because I'm just full doomer right now, I guess. But let's talk about Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen being back, Jake. I actually put out a tweet before the game on Sunday saying the most likely scenario that I could see is Ballard back, Steichen back, and then obviously Gus Bradley's the fall guy. We've obviously explored that quite a bit on this show over the past month or so of the season. Now, there was a little bit of heat before the game on Sunday with reports of maybe Dodds could become the general manager. Maybe the Colts could move on from Chris Ballard. But nah, man, 9th time is the charm. Chris Ballard is back for 9 times, the 9th year for him. Shane Steichen gets his 3rd year. What was your immediate reaction, Jake, when you heard I guess when you saw Jim Irsay's long tweet about, both of them being back for next season?
Well, I was a little surprised that it got squashed immediately, right away, like the night of the game. And luckily, I was home already to report on it. But no, we kind of expected that. I went into this game saying, Jim Irsay, I think, would most like to have Steichen and Ballard together with one more year to evaluate Anthony. And if they would beat the Jaguars, then, okay, nothing is affected. But if they, were to get embarrassed by the Jaguars, maybe that changes things. Now, obviously, the note and everything was premeditated. It was wrapped up in a pretty package. So it was probably going to be the plan for them all along. But we didn't expect a big change to happen. This is kind of what we thought. Like, they would just keep rolling. We don't know why. Jim Irsay hasn't really spoken to us out for a while. I mean, that's one thing the note to the fans last night didn't really cover is why, other than I believe in them. I think we're going in the right direction, but they got a lot of stuff to sort out that Shane can't answer because he keeps stuff so close to the vest that he doesn't really know how to answer these things directly. We're going to talk to Chris Ballard sometime this week, and maybe we'll get some answers there, because even if he might get a little fiery or combative with these end of season press conferences, he at least tries to answer things the best that he can. So there's a million questions to ask. We can't ask Chris Ballard why Jim Irsay has so much faith in him. But you and I think we're open to Shane Steichen returning. I'm not super ready to close the door on Steichen, but if they were going to get rid of Chris, you might as well clean the whole house, So we gonna see. Like you said, 9th time's the charm. 9th, it's going to be different this time, So what changes to his approach will Chris Ballard make? Likely none. I think it's very telling that probably the biggest leader on the team, DeForest Buckner, though, has become very outspoken the last 5 or 6 times we've spoken to him. He wants change this offseason. You're wasting the prime of a guy who is a perennial Pro Bowl talent. Quentin Nelson won't answer it, but he's tired of this losing as well. You owe it to these older veterans who have believed in you, believed in the system, been patient. You owe it to them to do something.
Yeah.
Clearly what your belief system is does not work. The locker room has, I don't want to say it's turned on each other, but they've laid each other's stuff out in the public now. They've talked about guys being complacent, their egos being too big, guys not preparing the right way. This locker room you thought you were pampering the whole time, Chris Ballard, they're not into it anymore. They want to win. The locker room is watching thing, that's toast. That's done. By any means necessary, these guys want to win. They want to get in the playoffs. They don't want their careers wasted. And you're getting another chance, bud. Do something with it.
Yeah, and we will talk more about kind of that culture of complacency, which we talked about a lot on this show, but DeForest Buckner, in our next segment, we'll talk about his exact comments on there and how he went into it really well today with your guys' media availability. But one thing I really want to add to this is Chris Ballard was asked actually, and shout out to the Indianapolis Colts beat guys. So all of you guys, Jake, who are Crocs, all of our Crocs on the ground there with the Colts beat. Because Chris Ballard was asked in August of last year. I can't remember who asked him, probably James Boyd or someone like that, or Nate Atkins, but asked him, about his approach and how, after all these years of it not working, does he, foresee himself changing his approach? And I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but he essentially said this is what he believes in. And if it gets him fired, so be it. And I'm a big proponent of when someone tells you who they are, you got to believe him. He's telling us who he is. He's not even mincing his words here. He's not even adding, potential, arbitrary things to it. He's telling us who he is. He's saying that this strategy that he deploys is what he believes in, and he'll go down with this ship if he has to. So there's no real reason to think, like, even let's say that he is truly on the hot seat for the first time in his career. Let's say he goes into the season with the mindset that this is his last chance. He's more of the type of person to go down with his philosophy than he is to change it all up for one last ride. That's just not what he does. So for people expecting, like, I'm fine with Chris Ballard as long as he's maybe 30% more aggressive, or he's just a little bit more aggressive to fix this team, it's just not who he is, though. And I'll say one thing in particular before we get into segment 2, because segment 2 is where we're really going to explore this, but his philosophy does not breed competitive culture in this organization. It's a lot of get my guys in the building. My guys are the starters. I'm not really going to bring in any real competition for them. I mean, you got below average to average starters at, free safety or at one of your linebacker spots or at some of the defensive line spots. And their biggest competitions are day 3 rookies or day 3 rookies from 3 years ago. And that's really their only competition. So when you mention things like the Buckner comments, which again, we're going to get to in a second, that's really where it comes from. These guys aren't getting pushed. If a guy underperforms as a starter, that's just an underperforming starter for the season. There's no real threat to the guy coming off the field. The only time you really see it happen is when it's a guy that Ballard's not too attached to, like a Dallas Flowers early in the season. And who knows what happens behind the scenes there that led to his release and led to Sam Womack being put in the lineup. But even that one took like 3 weeks before Womack officially became the starter on the outside, when it was very clear that Womack was the better player between the two of them. So it's just this culture. And again, we're going to get into it, but like, I'm so tired of the Chris Ballard method here. And here's the thing. I know I'm going on a long rant here, and that's just what I do on this show, but the draft and develop and not really use free agency method of being a general manager, it can work. It really can work. But the thing is, you have to hit on your draft picks. So what we have right now is a guy who's missing on his draft picks, showing loyalty to his missed draft picks time and time again. And you're breeding this culture of just complacency and guys who, I mean, I'm not going to go into names here, but you got guys that want contracts before their final year of play, and then they throw hissy fits about it. there are multiple guys that it's happened to. I mean, obviously the big one in the media was Jonathan Taylor, but there's other ones as well that have had the same situation. So yeah, it's just a bad culture here. And I'm glad DeForest Buckner said something. I'm actually going to lead into our second segment here by leaving it right there, Jake. I know I'm not giving you a chance to respond right there, but we have a whole off
Oh, you're
season,
good.
Jake. We're going to dive into all this. But coming up, guys, we're going to get into some of DeForest Buckner's comments because probably the biggest leader on the team finally aired some dirty laundry. And honestly, it's something I needed to hear. So Jake's going to walk us through those comments here in just a second.
Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. And that's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. And on the other side of it, getting hired, LinkedIn is incredibly valuable. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that, and that's why they connect you with the best candidates using your data that you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections that you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn has helped them find high quality candidates. I know from experience how important it is to make the right hiring decisions. You want people you can count on and that you don't have to babysit, essentially. So having access to insights like what skills that candidates have or how they're connected to your network, that helps you feel confident when you pull the trigger. So hire smart this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And guys, did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I've had quite a few subscriptions I didn't even realize that I was still paying for. And Rocket Money has made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for all of your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Guys, my wife and I have used Rocket Money for quite a bit now, and my debt has been dropping so much since we used Rocket Money. Rocket Money has been very, very clutch for us. And Rocket Money has over 5 million users just like me that have saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Again, for me, one of the best features is that subscription tracker. I found old subscriptions to streaming services from old email accounts and from I think I found one for this place called FYE, which was a CD store near me. I don't know why I was still paying for that one, but I was for years. So Rocket Money helped me catch that and get that off the books there. Plus, with their goals feature, guys, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future with no more stressing about budgeting every single month. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked on. rocketmoney.com/locked on. All right, Locked On Colts Everydayers, we're back with all things Indianapolis Colts heading into the offseason. Now, Jake was there this was what, locker cleanout day, right, Jake, is what we call it? Yep. So Jake was there for locker cleanout day, and one of the Colts' biggest leaders, most vocal leaders, I guess, in recent weeks, all of a sudden, he's the quiet DeForest Buckner, has been talking quite a bit of late, but DeForest Buckner kind of laid it all out there to you guys. What were some of the things that DeForest Buckner said to y'all?
Yeah, he's really been leading up to this all season for the most part, especially this back half. But, obviously the defense it's just a total mystery. They get up for competition against, the Lions, the Bills, the Broncos. They want those matchups. But then when it comes to the teams they think they can dominate, they're just totally aloof. And Buckner was asked, tackling aside, we've heard for weeks now they suck at tackling. It's true. Yes, it's been a big problem on defense. But, what's behind all this? These are veterans. These are grown men. Tackling is a fundamental you learn when you're in Little League. And Buckner basically said it's ego and complacency and a lack of guys being pushed from depth behind them That's at the root of the problem. Guys are playing as individuals rather than as a unit. Gus Bradley said that same thing last week. They saw on tape in that Giants game a bunch of instances of the ball going one place and defenders just not going to the ball because another defender was nearby and that they didn't need to swarm to the ball. Basically passing the buck onto somebody else. And that's something, the leaders of the team, DeForest, Kenny, they're seeing those things. Guys are just out there on vibes, not really playing as a unit. And their starting positions have been bought or drafted, just like you mentioned in the last segment. They're not getting pressure from depth behind them because there is none. Position groups are not being bolstered to create real competition. And it's just made guys change the way they view things. And, Buckner said, we need more competition on this defense. Guys have to get pushed. And a great example he gave was Alec Pierce. That's a guy who plays a position that couldn't be any more different from defensive tackle. And he used it as a great example. Alec Pierce was, kind of on the rocks. This was a make or break year for him because he's underperformed because the Colts really haven't had quarterbacks that can accentuate his skill set. But here the Colts draft A.D. Mitchell at like 51, 52, whatever it was. And that obviously put a target on Alec Pierce's back, and he responded in a great way. And DeForest Buckner shouted Pierce out for that. And he's like, we need more of that. Speaking about the defense, but the roster in whole, they need guys to not feel safe. And that's been a huge problem. And it's showing up in practice. That's what Kenny Moore is kind of the one who blew the lid on this whole thing at midseason. Guys aren't preparing the right way. There's no sense of urgency. And Buckner just kind of sent it home today. Basically guys don't have to perform like they love this thing because their jobs are safe. And that's just a massive thing that has to change this offseason. Buckner was on, right after speaking to us, he said he had conversations to go have, I'm assuming, with Steichen, Ballard, and other coaches and, people in the organization. But Buckner, he said this after the game last night too, like he's going to be vocal in the way he wants changes made this offseason. He's going to try and recruit guys in free agency. Like Buckner wants real change for this team.
Yeah, and I respect him for wanting that real change. Obviously, we have an off season of podcasts to talk about how, look, we know who this general manager is. It's probably not going to happen. But I did want to highlight, again, the culture of complacency. I think Buckner really hits a nail on the head. And I love that he brought up the Alec Pierce thing because Alec Pierce was really pushed this offseason by a young, athletic, talented kid coming in. And even though Mitchell didn't have the season we kind of expected, it still pushed Pierce to be the best version of himself this season. Now, I'm not saying that every position you need to spend a top 50 pick to push everybody, but think about the situations across the defense coming into this offseason, right? Let's look at the secondary in particular. Jalen Jones, who was pushing Jalen Jones in practice this offseason? Dallas Flowers. I can't even think of who else. Who else was on the roster pushing him? Nobody. Who was pushing Juju Brents in the offseason? Nobody. Who was pushing Nick Cross in the offseason? Nobody. Who was pushing Julian Blackmon? They didn't have safeties. Yeah, they had every position locked in place before the season. I mean, we tried to do camp battles for starting spots, and all of our camp battle episodes prior to the season were talking about backup spots or depth spots because all the starters were locked in place. And the Colts have had the same starters essentially locked in place since 2022. Oh, and let me remind you what happened in 2022. They were one of the worst teams in football. So essentially you're saying, oh, besides quarterback, we were a fine football team. We're going to keep running it back with everybody since then. And this is what happens. You get this air of complacency where you get these guys who have been a part of losing football teams. And I'm not saying these are bad players. I'm not saying that all these players are bad and they need to be replaced and benched. But when you have guys who are associated with a losing culture and constantly on losing teams, we can't just be resting on our laurels and running the same guys back out there every year. Oh, don't worry. With time, they'll get better. You got to push them a little bit. You constantly see teams like, the Buffalo Bills are a draft and develop type team. They are very much draft and develop. But that doesn't stop them from going out there and adding low-level free agents to push guys. I mean, they added Taylor Rapp the last couple seasons at safety, who was supposed to be maybe a fill-in starter or a replacement level guy, essentially becomes a starter for them and a really good player. Damar Hamlin was a player who started off as like a day 3 guy, worked his way up on the roster, and then they eventually felt good enough to move on from Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde because they had a young player ascending behind him in Hamlin. And that's just their safety position group. They have obviously other position groups doing the same, but it's about adding legit competition to your roster. It can't just be, EJ Speed is having a bad season this year. Who's going to replace him? A day 3 rookie in Jalen Carlisle, who missed most of the year with injury. Saguna Luby, who's an undrafted free agent who bounced around a little bit. So what do you do when one of these guys struggles? You can't do anything. You just leave him out there to struggle.
Right.
This team has a real issue with, it commits too much to people. Even Dalton Tucker this year, it was like a month of really bad play of just killing the Colts offense before they finally made a move at right guard. It's just the culture of this team right now. It's like once you're in, you're set, you're established, you're owed a contract all of a sudden if you're even like a baseline player. And it needs to change. Like, I'm not saying you give up on these guys after one day or anything. Like, you can take time with them. But aside from a couple cases, like Nick Cross was pulled quick in his rookie season and eventually worked his way back to the starting lineup, and he got better because of it. So maybe there needs to be some of these
they had Rodney McLeod there.
Right. Yeah.
Don't put so much on these rookies.
Right. So there are some cases where, bringing in the vet to push them actually makes these kids better in the long run. But when they ask so much of these guys from day one, and then they're constantly starters no matter what, and they're never pushed, aside from a couple cases here, you get this air of complacency. So again, we have a whole offseason to talk about this, and because I don't expect much to change with the Colts, but I guess that will lead into our final segment here, Jake, where what are the big changes that are going to happen? Shane Steichen's back. Chris Ballard's back. Most of this roster will be back. I mean, they already have like 40 contracts set in place. So most of this roster will be back. What's going to change this offseason? We'll talk about it here in just a second.
All right, the NFL playoffs are here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up the W. Personally, I love betting on which players are going to score touchdowns, how many points each team are going to score. It's thrilling when you actually get it right and you hit and get your money. Not only can you bet on who's going to win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players are going to score the touchdowns. That seems to be a really, really popular pick this year. And then again, how many points each team is going to score, and so much more. Lots of props out there. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Zach. So when we talk about acceptance that Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen are going to be here in 2025, we say, okay, so cross those things off the list because that's not changing. What big things can the Colts do still with it in mind that, who the decision makers are going to be? Obviously, the first domino that's going to fall any moment now, it literally could happen while we're talking. We imagine Gus Bradley is not going to be brought back. Now, I don't want to say he could be fired because this is year 3. He could have signed a 3-year deal and they're just not going to re-sign it. Right. But regardless, parting ways with Gus Bradley. So that's the easy one. But what realistic things that I guess aren't too far out of the realm of possibility and comfort zone for Chris Ballard do you think they can do to get some positive momentum going into the year?
Yeah, so the Colts have to sell the fan base on some sort of change. So there has to be some semblance of fall guys for this season. We know Chris Ballard doesn't get held accountable for bad seasons. Shane Steichen's not being held accountable. And by all intents and purposes, I don't think Anthony Richardson, for the most part, will be held accountable either, because I'm assuming he will be the starting quarterback next season as well. So with those big 3 not being held accountable for the Colts missing the playoffs, you have to find other fall guys And Gus Bradley's just the easiest one. He is so easy. And don't get me wrong, he is certainly worth getting fired or not getting his contract renewed when you allow 45 points to the New York Giants, when you allow 37 points to the Jacksonville Jaguars, 30 points to the Tennessee Titans. I mean, the writing was on the wall for Gus Bradley. Yeah. So we anticipate that coming here soon. I'm assuming it's going to be done during Chris Ballard's press conference, where he will update us that they won't be bringing him back or something like that. Now, when it comes to the next defensive coordinator, they're in an interesting spot because it could be seen around the league that this is more of a lame duck situation with Steichen and Ballard. Like, some people might see they only have 1 year left. Personally, I don't know if Ballard only has 1 year left because, look, the guy can't die. So why would I anticipate that he would, he'd be gone after next season, like regardless of what happens? But we'll see, I guess. So that could hurt some of their, prospective candidates right there in terms of finding like a high quality guy like the Bengals defense coordinator who was just fired. Like that's going to be one of the more sought after names. Robert Saleh, I don't think the Colts are going to be big players for him because he's going to have a lot of offers. But you could see maybe like a veteran coach on his last legs, like a Dennis Allen type, or someone who's friends with a Steichen or a Ballard like Chris Harris, or maybe a guy with Wisconsin ties like a Jim Leonard could be a dark horse. Like there are some names that look, there's only 32 defensive coordinator positions in the NFL. You're going to get somebody decent, but I don't think they're going to be big players for the giant names there. So that, again, me kind of pouring water on big changes there. In terms of the roster, I wouldn't expect Ryan Kelly and Dio Dangbo to come back this offseason. I do think it feels pretty obvious those guys are going to walk. Outside of that, though, again, this is Chris Ballard we're talking about. He might re-sign everybody else because that's just what he does. And they don't have a lot of salary cap to play with this offseason. They have around $28 million, I believe, is what it's going to be. Now, they could open up some more space if they end up releasing Braden Smith. Because we don't really know what's going on with that situation. Again, we're not going to speculate on what's going on with Braden Smith, but if the Colts opt to move on from Braden Smith, they could save quite a bit of money on that contract, get into like the $40-ish million range for cap space. But then again, I don't really expect much change. Like Jake, you can jump in here, but it's Chris Ballard we're talking about. Like he's going to go down with his ship, man. Like, we're going to get, another draft class in here that's going to be relied to be starters. We're going to get a lot of re-signed players, maybe one or two free agents that they can really push on us and be like, look, we made a big move for you guys. And it'll be like a Samson Ebukam type contract. And that'll be it. I don't really anticipate many big changes outside of them just praying that Anthony Richardson figures it out this offseason.
Yeah, I'll just go through some quick roster ones real quick before I want to get at like the biggest roster pieces that I think they should adjust. So, Tanner Bortolini and Matt Gonsalves becoming new starters on the offensive line, certainly a possibility. Again, we don't know what's going on with Braden Smith. Maybe we'll figure out something in terms of his status with the team when Chris Ballard speaks. I think they got to get real competition for Anthony Richardson, and not in the form of an over-the-hill quarterback or anything like that. I'm talking like a Justin Fields or something, like someone capable of being started throughout the year if need be, if Anthony's just not cutting it or what have you. They got to get a real running back too. Trey Sermon got so much equity off of that Steelers game last year. Him and Tyler Goodson, that was not an adequate backup situation behind Taylor. And it allowed for Taylor to really never leave the field. And when he did, it was very noticeable because people weren't productive. So the big things we ought to get to. So they need to go into 2025 with some mix and or of significant players at tight end, linebacker, cornerback, and or safety. Those things have got to be addressed. Tight end, obviously.
List a handful of other positions too. Running back,
right.
Offensive line could use some more. Bottom of the roster, wide receiver, quarterback. Like, man, I feel like there's like some of the biggest positions here.
There's a lot. But no, some of the biggest issues I saw this year, obviously nothing coming from the tight end department whatsoever. It once was a group we thought might be the deepest group on the roster, but couldn't be further from the truth. Linebacker, that's been not great this year. Yes, I know Zaire Franklin made the Pro Bowl. Yes, I know he's top 3 in franchise tackles again, blah, 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 blah. But him and EJ Speed have the same strengths and weaknesses, and it created a big problem. If Jalen Carlisle and Zaire are your 2 starters at linebacker next year, like, it's probably a stabilization, maybe, but I think there's more that can be done. And then cornerback and safety, which is going to lead me into a quick mini rant real quick because it's something that kind of fired me up today. So Julian Blackmon, by all stretches, had a disappointing season. He's one of those players that we get yelled at every week that they need to cut him. He's a bum, get him off the team, yada, yada, yada. I have always held him in very high regard. He had a great summer. He was the defensive MVP of the summer. He was awesome. Had an incredibly disappointing season. And suddenly was unable to tackle. Well, we learned today he suffered a torn labrum week 1 and kind of had to adjust the way he was attempting to tackle for risk of further injury to that shoulder, basically. And it led to a guy just being a total shell of himself. Now, why was he forced to play like this when he so clearly was not himself and was perhaps a liability? It's because they didn't do anything at safety. The reason Blackmon had to get moved back to free safety is because nobody else could do it. Nick Cross was the other de facto starter as the second safety, and he had to be played at strong safety. You didn't have anyone else that could do it because you neglected the position, and now you got this dude playing on one arm, and it looks like he's playing on one arm all season. And that's just, how do you let that happen? And it's not an all shucks, I should have fixed it. No, that everyone yelled at you about the secondary all offseason long. Like, to me, that was mind-blowing, but also not surprising. I was like, how do you let this happen? So yeah, something nice in the veteran department at cornerback and safety, I think would be very helpful for them.
Are you going to go after Chris Ballard in his press conference? Because you know he's going to take victory laps about the cornerback position in his press conference. You know he's going to do it.
I don't think any of us want to let that happen.
Oh man, it's going to be
end of season press conferences are usually the most sassy toned talks we have with Chris each year. It's all done with respect, but we have tough questions, and he is going to try to defend himself, I think.
I mean, look, we got 8 years of evidence on you now at this point, man. I don't know how much more defending he can do, but
working on 9.
We'll see. Yeah, I guess maybe next year or something he'll finally take accountability for. I don't know. We'll see. We do want to appreciate you guys for sticking with us. I know it's a tough time. I know a lot of people aren't renewing their season tickets. A lot of people are upset right now. We do appreciate you guys sticking with us here at Locked On Colts, and we're going to try to make your offseason as entertaining as possible despite everything going on with this Colts team. So thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On Colts your first listen today. Next, go find Locked On NFL. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. If you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at ZachHicks2 on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love you guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.